The Chapter 2 will cover the CWF and NWA Indiana days. Just pretty much on the owner's philosophy at the time. It's you know, what our opinions are on it, and pretty much I'll let Hadley start. You know, he's got a lot to say.
Yeah, my problem with their philosophy was very 80s. But the weird thing is even in the 80s, you know, you look back at like Flair. You know, the Horsemen, they would attack people. They would, you know, and it wasn't just attack them after the match and then someone makes a save. You got your tag main event. I'm talking like the Horsemen would beat up a guy in a parking lot, and then that would be, you know, that would carry on a storyline. With Sean and Guy, it was, okay, we're gonna have Kenny Courageous versus Billy Rock for the next 3 shows, and that's all they're gonna do is wrestle. No promos, no attacks, no setting up the match, really. I mean, every now and then they might, but like for the most part, it was just they'd wrestle 3 matches. It was like a series in baseball. I didn't understand it. It's like, why do the fans care? Like, really, why do they care that whether Billy Rock wins or loses? This is just a match now. You know, throw us something. Doesn't even have to be a stipulation. Just give us a reason why Billy Rock wants to beat in Kenny Courageous' head. But it's like, you know, like our storyline. We had ours that we'll talk about later. We wrestled 3 times, but it was spread out over time. And it's like the crowd, and you know, I'm not trying to put us over, but we'll talk about it later. But in the main event, that last man standing match, obviously our theory worked because that crowd was just salivating for us to get our hands on each other. They weren't just, oh yay, the babyface hopefully wins. It was like, come on, Hadley, rip his head off. That's what wrestling's about. It's about bringing emotion out of the crowd. And to me, Sean and Guy just did not do that. And plus it got to the point where, you know, when we would, I remember a show where it was, you know, they started doing this new thing where like January was a veteran show. February, we would sell tickets to get on the show. And here's shoot part of it. Yeah, I bought my own tickets. Yeah, I didn't sell them. I just bought them so I could get on the show. But anyway, I remember that first show we did that. You know, the Uprising had just started, and I remember we showed up, and I was wrestling PT Hustler, which I think I was supposed to wrestle Chase Richards that night, but it got switched to PT. And I remember being semi-worried about it because the month before we did a tag match with me and you versus Crisis in Houston, and he came in and changed everything about the match that we were going to do. And I told guys, like, I didn't really appreciate that. And then next thing I know, PT requests to wrestle me. It's like, So, but anyway, I was like, whatever, if I get beat up, I get beat up, not the first time. So, I remember we showed up and we started talking about the match, and you were like, who's going over? I didn't even look at the sheet. I knew right away. So he's like, who's going over? I was like, him. Like, I didn't even look at the sheet. Technically, I didn't know who was going over, but by philosophy. Yeah, by philosophy and the context of how we've been wrestling for the past 1.5 years, 2 years, whatever it was. Yeah, I knew he was going over. And that's what it got to. It got to the point where if it was a veteran versus a rookie, yeah, the rookie wasn't winning.
My viewpoint on their philosophy was, like he said, is just very, very mundane, very typical, ordinary, you know. And what, like I said, it affected me more because of the little flip-flopping that he thought that people didn't care about, you know, the Luis Rojas character, which at the time they really didn't. But they saw, I don't know if they saw glimpses or whatever of, you know, someone that could be better, because it seemed like, you know, I think for 3 or 4 straight shows, I was being flip-flopped from a face to heel to a face to heel. I'm like, you know, how are they ever going to back me or hate me one way or another if I can't be one thing or another, you know?
Yeah.
I'm not just here, you know, oh, you're just lucky to have a spot, you know. I'd rather not have a spot on a show than to be back and forth and, you know, people just say, I can't believe you one way or another, Luis Rojas, you know.
I remember when we did our handicap match with Brian, We were heel. What, we've been in the business, I think, 3 months at the time. We were heel. The following Sunday, for the TV taping, you were a babyface. And it was like, I remember on that same taping, I was a heel and a babyface. I was a babyface at the beginning of the night, heel at the end of the night. Like, and there was no, like, reason for my turn. It just happened, and it was just like that was the other thing. They didn't give a reason for why you kept flip-flopping. Yeah. They just, you're just what you're doing. You were like the 2006 version of Natalia.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, that was kind of my real issue. Another thing that kind of irked me, but it was the last show that CWF or NWA Indiana ever did, was Sean, which, you know, like I said, some people have said, you know, and I see people's viewpoints when they bring this up to me, but Sean had actually typed out what we were supposed to do. Like, pretty much move for move, you know. This guy, maybe not moves per se, but okay, this guy will be in the ring and then he'll tag in this guy, and then it was an 8-man tag. And I think, if I remember right, I think I was like the veteran.
Yeah.
And I was what, 2 years into the business, but you know, but it was fun, you know. But I was just like irritated, you know, I had the heel face thing going on, and then now I was kind of being insulted in a way of having my stuff typed out for me. I'm like, I'm better than this, you know. And you know, it was just like a really a smack in the face, you know. Like I said, you know, I have no heat anymore, you know, with all that stuff. It's just more of like looking back at it, you know, I was just really irritated and bugged by it, you know. Obviously, I got over it and went on to bigger and better things, but, you know, at the time, it bugged me. And it's at that same show that, you know, they had announced that Brian and Martin Fernandez were buying them out because they wanted to be out of the ownership part. And Martin and Brian had asked us, hey, are you on board? You know, and, you know, they were the ones who actually, you know, gave us that catapult. They saw in the bits and pieces of what we'd done over the first 2 years of our career, they knew, hey, these guys can actually, you give them the heel, the top heel spot, and they will deliver. Mm-hmm. And, you know, forever, you know, we'll get to the Brian stuff later on, and, you know, we'll cover Martin as much as possible and all that stuff, you know, my hat's off to both of them. I mean, we appreciate that, even, you know, no matter what the issues are between Brian and ourselves, which, like I said, we'll get to later. You know, that's one thing I will always be grateful to Brian and Martin for, is they saw what CWF could have done with us, which we're about to get into that. And they saw it, and they saw for what it was, and said, hey, let's give them a shot at least, you know, give them a few months and we'll see where it goes from there.
Yeah.
And that's where kind of the Uprising started. Now, like I just said, we're going to kind of backtrack a little bit on what CWF NWA Indiana did wrong with the Uprising and how it actually came to be, kind of laying the groundwork for the Uprising. What do you remember about it?
I remember it was the rookie night for the Class Act Kenneth James and Martin Fernandez and all them. And I remember we weren't booked to wrestle, but they wanted us to do a segment with a guy. And what it was, we were complaining that we weren't being used or whatever. And, which, you know, I gotta be honest, back then, actually at that point, I wasn't as unhappy because we hadn't got to that part yet. But, I mean, I probably wouldn't have cared whether I was booked or not. But I remember, here's a little tidbit for you, a little inside info. I remember we got to the show, and she's now my wife, but at the time she was my girlfriend. Joanna, I think I just, you know, set her over there with like the other wrestlers, women, and I walked off because I wanted to go find out exactly what we were doing. And she was like angry about it or something, or she took it as I was blowing her off or something. So this angered me. The funny thing about it is it fueled the segment, because all night they wanted us to like walk around like we were just, you know, we were disgusted by the fact that all these people were wrestling and we weren't. Well, it's pretty easy to do that when you're seriously angry. So, like, it really fueled the segment. And I remember us going out there, and the guy had chosen you to talk, which at the time was perfectly fine, you know, definitely. I really hadn't shown any prowess on the mic. Not that anybody but Sean was allowed to. But, I remember, you know, we went out and talked. It was me, you, and Xavier Cross. Now, I'll be honest, when it came to in-ring ability or charisma or pretty much anything having to do with wrestling, no offense to him, but Xavier was not the greatest. He wasn't really even good. But, and we'll get to it later, but what they kind of did to him was wrong, even though he and I never really were the greatest of friends. But regardless. So I remember we go out there, we do the segment, and it just went over. We had the crowd up in our face, and I remember we had the crowd in our face. We get to the back, and I was babyface the 2 months prior. Imagine that. And but I mean, this one actually gave me a reason for going heel, surprisingly. And like all of a sudden they were talking about keeping us together, and everything was looking up. And for the next, you know, couple months, it seemed like it might have been, and then it just kind of disappeared. And to this day, we have thoughts on it. We have viewpoints, but we never had an exact confession as to why.
My opinion is, it's like, I mean, we've kind of been going on this whole chapter, is the fact that, you know, with the whole Sean thing, and you know, he's admitted, we were setting up the ring one time, and I don't know who we were talking about, it may have been Xavier, about, you know, how he had been cocky at times. Xavier had been known to be cocky, I mean, just for, you know, he didn't mean anything by it, it just kind of the way it came off, you know, he's a good guy. But Sean had said, you know, well, you know, I'm cocky, but at least I admit it, you know, and all this and that. And, you know, we kind of shook, because he was right, you know, he was actually being honest, as, hey, you know, he's cocky, you know, and that, I feel, was a major part on, like, you know, even though he could have done something great with it, he could have said, you know, if I could have made him the top babyface and all that, and working against top heels, him and Guy versus us, I mean, that's still a match, I mean, to this day, I still would have loved to have had. You know, those two guys or whatever against us, you know, it'd been awesome. And it probably made some pretty good money too, you know, back then. But that's my opinion on why it wasn't allowed to flourish, because as Hadley said, you know, we got a crowd reaction right from the get-go. And I don't know if Brian and Martin were watching from backstage back then, or you know, or maybe someone who was with them said, hey man, these guys got a reaction, you know, most of everyone is like, boo, but these guys are like, oh, you know, screw you, you know, but whatever the case was, is that we got a reaction, and it trickled into someone's ear, you know, and like I said, it was pretty much, you know, what could have been, you know, really what could have been for Sean and Guy, you know, we would have had a real reason to work our butts off and all that, and then like Hadley said, a few months later it just kind of fizzled out. So yeah, that brings us to close on chapter 2 on the CWF Indiana days. We still got so much more to cover. I mean, we're
getting ready to go into the BMF days, when the Uprising finally was able to beat the Uprising and other stuff.